Hello, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Damon Jensen Heitman, for those who don't know. This is the third part of our forum series at First Presbyterian Church, taking a look at non-lectionary scripture passages. Greg did a thing, Dan did a thing, and now the Reverend Doodle Harris is here to do a thing as well. Doodle, you probably know, serves as the chaplain and director of service learning, is that correct? Mm-hmm. At Hastings College. So I'm off to teach confirmation, and Doodle, take it away.
Hey. Thanks for having me. This is a fun three-part series. Greg, I stole your PowerPoint.
I offered it to you.
I did too.
But I must confess, I was a little sad that the entire series was named The Things We Never Read. Because I really wanted it to be named, The Things Maybe We Should Read. Because I am convinced that some of the best stories and best learning moments from the Bible are not in the lectionary. And I give this to you because it was given to me. My 11th grade English teacher, because you can't study literature without knowing parts of the Bible and getting those symbolisms and getting that reference. And she stood up in the class and she said, even if you're not a person of faith, you should read the Bible as literature. Read it as just you would read it. And that was such a gift to me to invite me into doing that. And so that indirectly 20 years ago led me where we are today. Oh, was it more than 20? Whatever. Getting old is really hard. And I say that, and I'm going to give you the example of the Song of Solomon. Only a very small part of this Old Testament text is in the lectionary. Do you know off the top of your head what Song of Solomon is about?
Yes.
Why you would, Craig?
I would because I'm a pastor, or I would because I like that form of literature, or what?
You wouldn't, because very little is in the lectionary. So if you're at a church that really sticks with the lectionary, this is something you wouldn't be exposed to. I got into studying the Song of Solomon because I had to for my exegesis exam. Had I not had to do it for that. It is a book that it is essentially love poetry. A bit of it is a little erotic. And it also has a relationship between an interracial couple. And so those are all things that if I were making the argument for who the church is, I would think we would teach ourselves and talk about sex is good. There's a lot of caveats there, but in general, it's a gift and it's good. And interracial couples are good to see and explore and model. And I think that's where our future is, right? We're not a bazillion years from now going to be all these different races. We're going to look a whole lot more alike. So I would argue that the Song of Solomon has some really great things for us to talk about in the church. But maybe, and I will say, if you want your teenage boys to read the Bible, this is where you point them. And here's the thing, this is what makes me laugh. It is like sensual poetry that is really old. Like, it is not like we think of today when we think of sensual, and it is like, oh, her lips were lovely. And I mean, it's nothing inappropriate. So that brings me joy about this book. I also I didn't see where you had talked about this, Greg. There are other lectionaries out there. We do tend to stick to the Revised Common Lectionary, but there's a narrative lectionary, which is a 4-year lectionary. It covers far more of the Bible. It goes in order. It doesn't skip passages when it starts in a book. So it's a bit more tedious, in my opinion, than the Revised Common Lectionary, but there's a fair number of churches that are using this text. In Louisville, where I came from, there was a group of pastors that would meet weekly to discuss the Revised Common Lectionary, and a separate, rebellious group that would discuss the narrative lectionary. So anyway, and then there is a 6-year lectionary out there, and I couldn't find its official title, but I worked with it before. The 6-year lectionary really does cover everything that's in the Bible. But that's something to consider, that it takes twice as long to cover the Bible than we do in our current lectionary. And it's also tedious because it's a bit repetitive. And it's tedious because it has way more Hebrew scripture in it. Because as you'll see, the Old Testament is way longer than the New Testament just by word count. So in our current 3-year lectionary that we use here, it is, in my opinion, the Old Testament that gets the shaft more often than the New Testament. And I think the Old Testament's got the best stuff. The Old Testament is full of stories, and the New Testament is full of letters, which I find much less fun to explore. But part of that's because I work with kids, and kids respond much better to stories than they do not stories.
So Paul's finger waggling.
Well, and it's just some of Paul's letter is just so complicated to sit down and even read with some of our college students. But they can respond well to a story. I got into a discussion with some of our college students the other day about how the book of Jonah is derived from the same fairy tale as Pinocchio. And that was so much fun to draw those comparisons and talk about that, because some of them had just watched the new, I haven't watched it yet. What is it, the real life remake of Pinocchio? Have you all seen this on Disney Plus? Okay, well, they had. So that was fun. Anyway, to say that there are some other options out there too. I wanted to talk about the book of Joshua, because in my mind, I'm writing a book that I will never write, called The Book of How We Had to Fight for the Promised Land. If you think of the promised land, if I promise you something, what is your assumption?
You're gonna get it.
I mean, you're gonna get it, right? If I promise to come to your birthday party and bring you a present, I will bring you a present. Unfortunately, according to the book of Joshua, that is not how the Israelites had it when they were coming into the promised land. And I really got stuck on this when one of my seniors that I used to work with came into my office one afternoon just in tears. And she, Doodle, you promised that God will take care of me and God will protect me and God will be with me, but God never did college applications. And she told me about all the essays that she had to write, and she told me about how she had already gotten rejected from her #1 college because she applied early and whatever. And she said, this is not what you told me this was going to be like. This is not what my teachers in high school told me it was going to be like. And so and now she's a senior at Indiana University and she's doing great. But that was a very real moment for me of, is this how God works? Does God make these promises and then we have to sort of fight to make them come true? That isn't how most of us are raised. I mean, you didn't make promises to your kids and then be like, just kidding. So anyway, this is what I want to explore. How do we in our humanity respond and react when we are promised something and then it requires so much of our own energy and emotions and efforts and even feelings of fighting? Does that make sense? And if the end you tell me I'm wrong, I welcome that too. So like I said, the book I'm never going to write, the book of how we had to fight for the promised land. And what I'm going to do is walk us through Joshua and ask some questions along the way about whether this rings true for you or whether I'm making it up. Joshua, to catch us up to date, the Israelites had just spent 40 years crossing the desert. Oh, good. I had dessert in there earlier. Just spent 40 years crossing the desert. We know when we read the Bible and we see the number 40, it's not a literal number. It's more of a symbolic number. It just means they had spent a really long time in the desert. We don't really think it's 40 years because those life expectancies would have been much longer for the people who made it the whole way. Doesn't that make sense? But by their calculations, it was a really long time. Moses never enters the promised land. And if you want to hear a sermon about that, I'm preaching it in chapel tonight. Moses, outside of the promised land, Deuteronomy 34 is part of the lectionary. I did look it up. This is what happens there. Do you all know the story? I'm going to tell it anyway because I really like it. Moses climbs up the mountain and he looks in the promised land and he makes this speech about how God has been faithful and God has been with us, and there it is, and then he dies. And there's no reason given for why he dies. They bury him up there, they go into a period of mourning, and the rest of Deuteronomy carries out. But it's this harsh moment. Like, Moses has accomplished so much. He's freed the Israelites, he's marched them across the desert for a long time, and then he dies at the top of Mount Pisgah looking over in the promised land. So, and the Israelites at this point this is my phrase, this is not a technical, academic phrase. I'm going to call them the very anti-king-like ruler people. They have seen a king-like ruler in Pharaoh. They've decided this is not for us. And so what they are doing, even walking across the promised land, is they are looking for military leaders and priests to lead them. They are not all about the king of the Israelites at this point. Does that make sense? A few books later, they're going to realize that military leaders are poor administrators and they're going to switch teams. But this is where we are in the book of Joshua. The first chapter of Joshua is the commissioning of Joshua, and we are familiar with this. You all ordain and commission and install church officers, right? We're good Presbyterians. Do you all commission people before you go on mission trips? You do? Okay, so that's what this is. This is not in the lectionary, but I wish it were, because this is my favorite. This is the very end of chapter 1 here. All that you have, this is the Israelites responding to Joshua. All that you have commanded us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. Oh, may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your orders and disobeys your words, whatever you command shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. Which is such a powerful statement in my mind that these people are telling their leader, be strong and courageous. They are blessing their leader in a way with these words right before they enter the promised land. I find that a bit moving. Do you all ever bless Greg and Damon with these words?
When it was installed.
And so CL, do you regularly say, all that you have commanded us, we will do? Wherever you send us, we will go? Let's start there.
I was thinking that.
I'm not.
So we have at the beginning that it's very militaristic language, and much of the book of Joshua is very militaristic and very covenantal language. And we'll get to the covenantal part. That's really the second half, a little more than the first half, but that's what this is. In Joshua 2, 3, and 4, I love the story of Joshua 2 as a kid, because I was the dork that read the Bible as a kid. But Joshua 2, Joshua gets these spies together. Do you know this story? Yeah, he sends them into the city of Jericho. He says, scope it out. Let's figure out how we're going to defeat. Jericho's the first city on our list. Sends them in. They almost get caught. The prostitute Rahab, they meet her. She hides them. She sneaks them out of the city. And they get back on the other side of the Jordan River with the Israelites. But it's this great story of hiding, and I loved it as a kid. It's a good vacation Bible school story. Also, it introduces us to the character of Rahab, which is who's going to come back and be alluded to over and over. She's in the genealogy of Jesus. If you trace Rob Babcock, and he's so funny. I got him to do a project with me on the genealogy of Jesus. Do you know Rob Babcock over at Sarah? She's part of. Okay, so he was working with me, and so he creates this this chart with the genealogy of Jesus, and he's keeping up with how many prostitutes are in the list and how many thieves are in the list and how many, and he has this really creative presentation about that. So anyway, that is chapter 2. Stop me when you have questions. But this is one of my things I'm thinking about. There are several times in the book of Joshua that in order to accomplish God's goal, you've got to be kind of sneaky. You've got to do things that are maybe a little questionable. Like send your spies over to the enemy. And how does that sit with our faith? That in order to accomplish God's goal, we have to be a little bit rebellious. Is that what your parents taught you? Something to think about. In Joshua 3, Joshua does cross over the river Jordan. That really is the Revised Common Lectionary. It's important because what else happens at the river Jordan? Jesus got baptized in the river. I didn't ask you. Jesus got baptized in the river Jordan. When they crossed the river Jordan, it's just like they crossed the Red Sea. It's a lot of the same language. God stops the waters way up here. The priest crossed first. They carry the Ark of the Covenant. All the people cross. As soon as the last one gets to land, the water flows again. A lot of identical language. So whoever is putting together this history of the Israelite people, they really want to bookend this story going across the wilderness with these identical miracles of a river stops. We cross through the river and then it goes again. Does that make sense? An argument to be some baptismal imagery there. In Joshua 4, the tribes of Israel raised their Ebenezer. Did I spell that incorrectly?
I think there's an A in there, it's
It's
easy.
very confusing to me. I looked up the word Ebenezer because we sing about here I raise my Ebenezer. Anybody ever thought to say, what's an Ebenezer? Did you know what an Ebenezer is?
Sword thing or something.
Pile of stone.
It's a pile of stones. The actual Hebrew word for it is Eben ha'etzer. So it's 3 words, all pushed together like a lot of Hebrew words are. Hebrew and Greek are kind of like German. You all have studied German. We're like, if they need a new word, they just put a couple words together and there it is. So that's a little bit of what Ebenezer is. It literally means in the Old Hebrew, helping stone. Which I find, thank you, Beverly. I appreciate that facial response. That was mine too. I always thought it was a stone of remembrance. We remembered what happened today. We remembered what we went through to get here. But the literal translation suggests maybe it is God helped us get here. And therefore we're going to know that God helps us. So stones of helping is the actual translation there. But then that leads me to my question, as we in our lives are thinking about what we have been promised, do we have things along the way that help us remember? Do we have things along the way that we mark in finding our own promises?
Wedding.
A wedding, absolutely. A graduation. Arguably a birthday party.
Baptism.
A baptism. I believe that we as humans really, whether we can articulate it or not, those rituals of crossing and those rituals of remembrance really help us mark in our journeys where we see our progress toward our own promised land. Does that make sense? Don't you have certain things that you have pictures hanging of in your home that just bring you joy? Because it is a small victory along the way of I'm getting there, or my kids are getting there, or whatever. Does that make sense? So that's a chapter in my book right there. Joshua 5, I think, is pivotal for the Israelites, and this never comes up in the lectionary. There are 3 distinct stories in Joshua 5, one of which is that they begin by circumcising all of the Israelite children who have not been circumcised. Why is this important? What was the covenant that God made with Abraham way back in Genesis, somewhere in the teens? Remember, this is the very first covenant we have in the second covenant we have in the Old Testament.
About Abraham having lots and lots of descendants.
Right, and in that same covenant, God says you gotta be circumcised. Circumcise yourself, circumcise your descendants. So that is the second covenant we have in the early books of Genesis. And here we have Joshua reliving it, right? The first one was the rainbow. That's kind of hard for us to manufacture, especially in the Old Testament, when we don't have prisms and stuff. But they're reenacting that covenant. We're also reenacting Passover. You remember Passover? That's how we got out of the promised land. Faithful Jewish people today still reenact the Passover. I'm taking the kids on a retreat from the college in a couple of weeks. Now we're going to be reenacting the Passover. Only I'm going to call it an escape route when we escape from Egypt, right? Because you have to be a little more clever with college students. But once they cross into the promised land, even though they really aren't living there yet, they remember who they are. They back up and they list who they are. And then the third part, which is my favorite, the commander of the army of the Lord appears to Joshua and the Israelites with a super long sword. And the commander of this angel says, I am with you. You've got this. With a super long sword. Those of us who have been taught as children to imagine angels appearing with halos and wings and speaking in soft voices is not at all how the Bible portrays the angels most of the time. If they don't have a sword, they have a flaming sword, right? in Luke 2, when we say a host of angels appear to the shepherds, host is a military term. It is a battalion of fighting angels in Luke 2 that appears. So angels, yes, messengers, yes, bringing good news, but with some militaristic language in there. Does this make sense? So here's my question for you. I'm making the argument that Joshua 5 is pivotal because we're doing two very important rituals to remember who we are. We're having our confirmation and our baptism and our wedding and whatever. And then we're celebrating Passover, the most recent thing. And then we have the angel with the long sword that appears. Which one? One of these three shows up in the lectionary text. Which of the three would you put in the lectionary text if you were deciding this in 1969 in the Catholic Church?
Israelites celebrating Passover.
Yeah. Oh, I have to look up which one it was. You're right, Passover is the one that is in the lectionary. Which it already appears in the lectionary from Exodus 10, early in Exodus. I would put the appearance of the angel of the Lord in front of Joshua. That doesn't happen all the time. We're going to see the Israelites celebrate Passover. We're going to see Jesus eventually take Passover and turn it into communion. Right? We're going to visit that over and over in the Bible and over in the lectionary. But some of these others we don't. And I think that's what makes them sort of cool stories that happen there. This angel, this commander of the army of the Lord, is going to show up repeatedly throughout Joshua, which is kind of a cool storytelling mechanism. If you want to be confident that you've got to fight for the promised land, how nice it is that occasionally you get an angel to say, keep it up, buddy, you got it. Does that make sense? Do we have any questions? I feel like I'm going so fast. I'm really excited about this. I love Joshua. In Joshua 6, we defeat Jericho. Not in the lectionary. Do you remember the story though? I am waiting for a Robert Langdon Dan Brown book to be written about this very passage. There's so much symbolism in it. We march around the city 7 times. We have 7 priests. We blow 7 trumpets. The last day we march around more than 7 times. Greg, Dan, do you remember? They march several more times. They blow the trumpet several more times. And the whole city just crumbles. Except for Rahab. She gets out okay. Everybody else dies. Because the city crumbles to dust. After they have marched around as God tells them to do so. I reenacted this in Bible school one year. It was really fun. We got out toy trumpets and
Joshua puts the family left.
that's it. That's it, yeah. It becomes not only a spiritual, but a story that you find in the South, the slaves will tell each other. We got this. We have to remain faithful. Joshua remained faithful. He eventually won. Here we go. But yeah, it becomes an important story that never appears in the lectionary. You see why I have feelings about the lectionary, right? In Joshua 7, the angel appears again to Joshua and says, all right, your next city is Ai. Go forth. And Joshua once again sends spies. I'm giving you the DRV, the Doodle Revised version of this. I do encourage you, if you are at all interested, go back and read it yourself and get your own revised version of this. But the story of Ai, Joshua sends spies, and the spies come back and say, oh, it is a tiny city. There's not many of them. We're going to be fine. We don't even have to send the full troops to attack Ai. So Joshua's like, cool, that's great. Joshua sends, hi, Maddie.
Hi, Doodle. I have a question.
For me?
Or
for someone in
anybody
here.
who works
Right.
here. Because I'm a freshman. I need to get bulletins. Might we know where those are?
So he sends a couple of thousand soldiers to Ai. Ai is small, untrained, expecting an easy victory. 36 of the Israelite men die, and the rest go back to Joshua, run back to Joshua. And Joshua's like, what's going on? Why didn't you win? This was supposed to be an easy victory. And they said, the angel appears. The angel is like what moves the story forward when we need something to move the story forward in Joshua. It says, your people did not follow God's commandments at Jericho. And what they didn't do was God limited the Israelite people to taking the livestock, something else from the city.
Yeah, but they took it all.
Yeah, you can't take their riches, you can't take their silver and their gold.
Ban, I guess.
And it turns out that some of the Israelites had taken their silver and their gold from Jericho. They were supposed to leave it there. And so the angel instructs Joshua to call up the Israelites tribe by tribe, and God will show him which tribe it was. And then from that tribe, Joshua calls them up clan by clan, and God shows Joshua which clan it was that stole. And then God tells Joshua to call them up family by family from that clan. So this is a lot of chapter 7. Joshua is calling them up family by family. God shows Joshua which one stole. They repent, but they get stoned to death by the rest of the Israelites. And once they get stoned to death, the angel says, all right, Joshua, you got it now. You can do it. It's a bit of a dark story, I think. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, a bit of a dark story.
But even in the conquering of the promised land, God is still setting these boundaries for the people, and they're still pushing against them a little bit to figure out. This is their first time figuring out who they are in a land that is supposed to be theirs, and a land that is flowing with milk and honey, which is Bible code for, has all the resources you need, and no one's going to be poor, and they're screwing up. I don't know what to say, except it feels very human to me, their behavior. And so then Joshua says, all right, we're going to go back. And once again, the angel says, you got this. It's going to be an easy victory. But Joshua isn't so sure he trusts the angel at this point, because it was not an easy victory the first time they attacked Ai. And so Joshua sends half of the troops, less than half the troops, all these numbers are in the Bible, to the east side of Ai. They're going to attack Ai from the east. And then sends the other 2/3, who I like to think of as the Jedis, around to the other side of Ai to the west. And they sneak around the back, and they are looking for the sign. So Joshua and the 1/3 attack from the front. They draw out the Ai soldiers. They run across the field, and Joshua holds up his sword. This is the making of the Lord of the Rings epics right here. Holds up his sword. The sun hits the light on his sword just right. It reflects to the west, all the way to the west of Ai, where those soldiers see it. They know that the soldiers of Ai have now left the city, and so they enter the city from the west and decimate it. And the soldiers are surrounded, and they all die. So that is my question. How do we have got to fight for our promised land? The Israelites had to fight for their promised land. And there is this invitation into creativity, in my opinion, in order to do it.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
I will master my watch at some point. Does that feel right? Does that feel consistent with your experience? I'm asking you to interpose your experience on the Bible, yes. But how does that feel like what you go through? Or have gone through? We sort of, my family, I thought about this a little bit when we moved here to Hastings, Nebraska, because as lovely as you are, and I've enjoyed being here, I didn't know anything about Hastings, Nebraska before I moved here, except that I knew Greg had moved here and he had told me a little bit about it. And we as a family felt called and believed that we have this dream. I love being in ministry. My spouse loves being in music. We want our kids to be raised in a place that loves on them and where they can be smart and funny and creative and be themselves without too much pressure to be somebody else. Does this make sense? And like, we found ourselves at a crossroads where we had to find somewhere else that this was going to happen. And we found you all. And so that, maybe that's not creativity, but it did take a bit of outside of the box thinking for us to reimagine ourselves in a new place pursuing those same dreams. Does that sort of make sense? I see lots of, okay. Joshua 9, I feel like is the basis of the book. What book did we all have to read? How to win friends and make enemies. How to make friends.
people.
That's it. I feel like Joshua 9 is the basis of that book. We have all of these tribes, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And they say, ooh, this army, they're winning and they're small and maybe they shouldn't be, but they are. They have conquered Jericho, one of the strongest military cities we have. They've now conquered Ai and they're heading our direction. What are we gonna do? And so these tribes, if you will, they all get together and they said, well, we're gonna fool them. We're gonna trick them. And so they wear their dirtiest clothes. They get their oldest donkeys. They get their oldest wineskins and hook them up to the donkeys. And they go marching to the place where Joshua is camped. And Joshua's like, well, who are you? What's going on? And they're like, we are poor travelers. We have come from afar. We have heard of your generosity and you're straight up right there buttering them up. Like, could you take care of us? And sure enough, Joshua gives them food, gives them new wineskins, and they make a peace treaty with Joshua right then and there. Don't conquer our lands. We want to live in peace with you. We know how strong you are. And so there's this moment where you think, oh, that's great. And then the Israelite armies march on a little bit and they get to the city of, was it Gibeon? One of the cities of these. I'm looking at you, Dan, because I think you know the Bible.
But yeah, but I have to tell you, this is the least favorite book of the Bible for me. So-
Really?
Yeah, so I don't spend much time in the details.
Maybe I can convince you differently. I almost never leave the Old Testament.
Oh, I love the Old Testament. Yeah, I love the Old Testament, but this one is just the foundation of so much people leaving the church sometimes. Like, why would God kill every last little thing? You know how many times we've had to answer that question? I'm sure you have too, right? You know, because God says, go into that city and kill every last thing, right? I mean, that's the hard thing about Joshua for me. And so, but I'm greatly enjoying this. You're adding a whole flair to the narrative. The Lord of the Rings thing, I think is a good call.
One of my professors used to say, when you're reading, especially the early parts of the New Testament, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Yeah.
And I have found that helpful advice when reading through this part. But anyway, they're camped at Gilgal. They go to approach one of these cities that belongs to one of these tribes. And sure enough, Joshua finds out the truth. Oh, they're really living here. They're our neighbors now. They tricked us. But Joshua, in this moment of believing that this peace treaty, this covenant is so important, and that he is honoring God and being faithful to God by upholding this peace treaty, he goes into the city and says, all right, I won't kill you, but I'll make you slaves. And this is when they shall be hewers of wood and drawers of water. And so that's occasionally my family's like, instead of calling someone an inappropriate word, we're like hewers of wood and drawers of water. Our insult for people who are mischievous and full of trickery and get things that don't belong to them. Does that make sense? But I am taken, although, you know, at Dan's point is, well, why didn't Joshua just change his mind? They clearly lied to him. They clearly took him for a fool. I think I would have destroyed them and not done what Joshua did. We're moving on. Joshua 10. A lot of people make a big deal about this name, King Adonai Zedek. There's some Hebrew in there somewhere, and I don't always get it right, so I'm not going to try. The name means Adonai. You recognize this from your Old Testament. He means Lord. But in this case, it's important because some people have made it not this way. This is not God. Adonai here just means Lord, master, person who's in charge. Zedek, righteousness. So we get to Gibeon and encounter the Lord of righteousness. And I've heard a couple of sermons that talk about like God made him the Lord of righteousness. God did not. That's what he chose to call himself. He wants to perceive himself as right. I know that you all probably don't need this corrective, but I need to give it to you to make myself feel justified. So they encounter the Ammonite king, Gibeon, Adonizedek. And the Ammonite king, like the other clans, see what's going on. I wrote down all these names for you. I typed them out because I knew you'd want to hear them. So he gathers together, King Adonizedek, he gathers together King Hoam, King Piram, King Japhia, King Debir, and he asked them to all come together and attack Gibeon, where the Israelites are now living. I can't do it alone. I can't defeat this army. Look what they're doing. I need your help. And so they all gather outside of Gibeon. They all bring all of their armies. They place them strategically. They should win. In all of these battles, the Israelites are outnumbered. It'll continue. I know Greg did 2 Chronicles, same story there. The Israelites are always outnumbered. They're never supposed to win. Just like God's not supposed to come in the form of a baby, right? You get this thread of like humility and underdog that underlies our religion. So they get outside the army, the city, they place their armies, and then the 5 kings run and hide in the cave. But that goes on. They're inside the cave. Of course, the Israelites win. That's the narrative of Joshua. They win with 2 helpful things. One, God decides to rain down stones on all of the Amorites. So stones are flying from heaven, and just to make sure God gets enough time to kill them all, the sun stands still. To make sure that there's enough time I guess God needed the light to see the soldiers to rain down the stones. So that's what's happening in Joshua 10. And to Dan's point, it's a gruesome story. If we believe it happened, just like it says, it's pretty darn gruesome. Joshua finds the kings in the cave during the battle and has some of his soldiers roll a stone in front of the cave and traps them in there. I'm trying to make this some sort of Jesus and the death of Jesus in the cave and the stone. I can't make it work in my mind. I don't have a sermon out of it yet, but I'm still pondering that. So traps them in the cave. The Israelites finish and they win. The Israelite soldiers unroll the stone. The king comes out. Joshua kills them by the sword, hangs them up on a tree. I am really sorry about my watch. Hangs them up on a tree, and then once they are fully dead or been enough of a public display to all the Amorites are dead. I don't know who they're a display to. Pulls them down from the tree, puts them back in the cave, rolls the stone back in front of the cave, and that is the cave of the kings, where Joshua thought it was appropriate for all of these enemies of God to go and their bodies to be left. So in fact, God is not righteous, the Lord is not righteous. Anyway, so that's part of their story in Joshua 10. In Joshua 11, we have Joshua beginning to move north. If I were that type of a person, and I'm not, I would have put a map up here. I feel like Greg is that type of a person. I've been in enough of his class. He would have had a map and little arrows, and it would have been really awesome, but you can imagine it. So they're moving north, and I put this in here by the waters of Merom because this is where they are, by this famous lake. There's a lot of paintings of it. It's one of those things that like is sort of lost from the Bible, but yet somewhere along the line, artists and other writers have picked up this. And it's only mentioned here in Joshua 11 and some of the other early Canaanite writing. And it's not a place of any real significance except this battle happened there. And they start to push their way into the northern kingdom, what we will later know as the northern kingdom, northern Canaan. Do you remember how after a while, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom split and God stayed with the southern? God's always with whoever's writing the stories, right, in the Bible. So God stays with the southern kingdoms and the northern kingdoms are sinful. But this is, at one time, it was all one kingdom. And so this is where we go in. This is what I find interesting about this passage. As Joshua is starting to conquer the northern kingdoms, the Canaanites in this time, the northern Canaanites, also have a pretty rich written history from there. There is no mention of this battle. There is no mention of Joshua defeating them. It's just suddenly they have the Israelites in town. And so I find that fascinating that this is a pivotal story in Joshua, because finally we're moving into the northern kingdom. And the residents there are like, they have no recalling of it. And then the rest of Joshua 11 is where we pivot into more of treaty writing, more of who Joshua's going to make peace with and what's going to happen to all the lands that we consider part of the promised land. Does that make sense so far? I don't know where this story fits into my thesis about we have to fight for what we're promised. Like, did the fight exist? Did the fight not exist? Do you remember that story in Harry Potter where like Harry is like, am I dead? Is this real? And Dumbledore's like, it doesn't have to be true to be real? So I don't know. That's I'm working on that in my head. But so this is where we enter the northern kingdom. Joshua 12 is a list. This is where you make the lists that you do at the session meetings at the church that no one ever reads later, but you do it because you have to, because you're the session of the church, right? It's a list of all the kings that Joshua defeated in Joshua 12. Joshua 13, God gives Joshua this list. All right, here's what you got to do, bud. Here's the rest of your marching orders. I think sometimes this is included because the Israelites want later generations to know that they are following God's instructions, that they are killing these people, they are conquering these cities because God told them to do so. I don't know whether I think God is giving out lists of people for you to destroy. I'm a little uncomfortable with that. And then Joshua begins dividing out the land. Joshua 14 is lists of who gets what land, including Caleb, the military leader. Joshua 15 is more lists of what tribes get what lands and what cities. 16, the same. I stopped reading at this point because I just don't care anymore. 15, 16, 17, we have some negotiations over the land. 18, we're still dividing out the land. And 19, Joshua 19, Joshua and his family get the land after what they've done. Joshua 20 is a fascinating chapter, never shows up in the lectionary. Wonder why. God is the subject here, establishes what we call cities of refuge. Have you heard about these in the Old Testament? They're really a northern Canaanite thing that the Israelites are adopting at this point. But like all things, right? The Israelites come through history, and even though they're told repeatedly not to worship foreign gods, some of the culture of these lands that they are conquering seeps into their culture. Does that sort of make sense? That's something we deal with.
Refugees, cities are where if you did something wrong, you went to be there so that nobody could touch you until after 2 years or something.
Precisely. Precisely. And the way that Joshua spins it is that if you caused an accidental death, because I guess you couldn't go if you killed somebody on purpose. I think this accidental death part is trying to merge the two cultures, right? Because the Israelites would never actually be like, yeah, go kill somebody for fun, right? This is their way of trying to, if you accidentally killed somebody. So you go to the city of refuge because you want to avoid the avengers of blood. The avengers of blood, the way they understood it is, if you kill someone in my family, it is then my responsibility to kill you. And so I am now an avenger of blood. And I can't tell, and I'm not smart enough to figure it out, whether this part of Joshua 20 was originally part of the writing or a later insertion, because it's so inconsistent with some of the language around it. But I also confess I haven't studied it in Hebrew. I'm looking at Dan.
We can talk about it.
But anyway, I don't know, but it's a fascinating part in the middle of all this treaty language. You get this, you will have this forever. But by the way, there's these cities. In Joshua 21, we give the priests some cities. The tribe of Aaron, they can go do their priestly things. And in Joshua 22, we're going to build another altar on the east side of Jordan to say we have conquered the promised land. We have to have another ritual. We have to have another pile of stones to say we have done this. Another Ebenezer. We move on to Joshua 23, which is Joshua's final speech. I'm sorry, that is my condensed version of Joshua's final speech. I am old. I kept serving God. You should too. God's promises never fail. And at this point, I think Joshua can make that comment because he's on the other side of the fighting. But I so wonder what this speech would have looked like as he's conquering all the other cities. Does that make sense? I have given you the cities for which we have a lot of detail about the militaries. Most of the rest of them, it's very formulaic language. The Israelites entered the city, they killed the people, they drug the king out of the city, they beheaded him, they decimated the city. They took the cattle, they decimated the city. It's very formulaic language. And it's basically that over and over, but insert a different name of the city. So, but this is where Joshua gets a little, I can say God's promises never fail after I get into the college I want with the scholarship I want too, right? I can say God's promises never fail after my family went through 2 years of infertility treatment, which was not fun. But in the middle of it, I don't think I could have said that. I don't think I was there. And I just wonder if that was Joshua's question there. And then Joshua 24 is the final chapter of the book of Joshua. You choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, I will serve the Lord. Remember this passage? It's such a powerful passage that it appears in the lectionary twice. Why do you put something in the lectionary twice when you don't have room to put everything in once? I have feelings. And now we have a third Ebenezer in the book of Joshua. And Joshua dies. That is the book of Joshua in a nutshell in 40 minutes. So I guess my questions are, one, what are your responses to this? How does the book make you feel? Does it belong in the lectionary? Does it belong in our study of, because we have to remember the lectionary was put together by men. Yes, they were men, put together by men who were as human as we are. And the people who chose the lectionary were men because they were Catholic. Just as human as we are. Does that make sense? It was them making the most faithful decisions they could based on the text they had and their goal of condensing it into, but I wonder if now, what's the difference between 1969 and 2023? Whatever, it's older than I am. Is there room to revisit what texts belong and what texts don't? I just threw a bunch of questions at you at once, but I'd love to hear responses.
Do you have suggestions on which ones you would put in? I'd like, the Battle of Jericho, and you've been mentioning some of these already, but look, since you know this and like it so much, which ones would you put in?
I think I would put in the story of I really like that pondering of, I did something wrong, I failed, God help me redeem it and fix it. As much as we don't want it to be militaristic, the Bible is militaristic. As much as we occasionally hear pastors say the Bible is not political, it's completely political. It is all about rulers and people and lands and borders. And so I put Jericho in. I put Daniel and the Lions Den in. Why the heck would you leave that out? It's about a man being so completely faithful to God that he is risking his life to demonstrate that faith. Why don't you leave that out? I put in Balaam and the donkey. That's one of my favorite stories. I put in the story of Elijah. Do you remember this? Is it Elijah or Elisha? I got them so mixed up. In the Old Testament, Elisha has the prophet, I think it's Elijah, has crossed the king. The king's pissed at him. So the king decides he's going to come and attack Elisha and his prophets. Comes at night to attack Elisha and the prophets. One of Elisha's aides wakes up, sees what's going on, wakes up Elisha, and the aide's freaking out. And Elisha's like, no, it's fine. And he's like, no, it's not. And Elisha's like, look. And suddenly the servant looks out, and the veil has been lifted and is able to see all the chariots and all the armies of God surrounding them that are going to defeat their enemies for them. And it's another story of have faith, even if you don't see God intervening for you when you open your eyes, when you look with different eyes. Anyway, that's just off the top of my head, Dan.
I appreciate your love for the story, but I've, for the last several years, been struggling with redemptive violence. You know, that we immediately move to violence as a redemptive solution to things. And then how do we work through all of this? So yeah, the Bible is very militaristic, right? And it always seems to be our first, if there's gonna be peace, it has to come through violence, right? And so that's where I really struggle with Joshua. And then, you know, Joshua 24, I would argue, is the entire reason chapters 1 through 23 are written. After the struggle, after this experience, you know, you've got a choice in front of you. You've got these other gods, the Canaanite gods, the Perizzite gods, and all this. Choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. You know? And so that's why it's the lectionary twice, because it's beautiful covenant language, right? But you're a college chaplain. How many times do the kids come to you and say, I just can't believe in a God that does all that. Every last kitten in I is destroyed or wherever, you know. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but it's you hear it.
So it sort of depends on who it comes from.
Yeah.
One of my typical responses is we're reading about people who didn't know the earth was round and didn't use indoor plumbing.
And thought the sun could actually stop in the sky.
So they are doing the best they can to understand the world, and hopefully now we are a little smarter than to make violence our go-to. Hopefully we figured things out a little bit better from back then.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I do is draw, and I'm sure you've seen this, draw in this little curve where this is taking the Bible literally, L-I-T,
Literally, just L-I-T.
perfect. And this is taking it figuratively. And this is where we have conservative all the way to liberal. And so one of our challenges in reading the Bible is that on both ends of the belief spectrum, if you will, you have people who really need to take the Bible very literally and very truthfully, and it happened exactly like it said it did. The conservatives, because they want to believe the earth is only 6,000 years old, and if it says so in the Bible, which is a holy book, it must be. And the liberals, because they want to reject the Bible because there's no way it's true. Like, I don't mean liberal faithful people, I mean like liberal, I wouldn't say unfaithful, people who are beyond belief, like, it's too fantastic, I'm not going there. But my experience is that it's because they want everything in the Bible to be true too. And so, I don't know if this answers your question, but I think the most faithful response is somewhere in the middle, somewhere between learning to balance how exactly did it really happen this way, and how exactly are these people doing their best to interpret God and their own motives and their own egos get in the way. And I can live here. I can't live here. I can't live with the Bible being exactly true, exactly like, I don't know if that helps. Yeah, Bob.
I've always thought of it as a progress, right? In terms of our relationship with God and the Old Testament, God is testing them, God is teaching them the way we teach toddlers. There's lots of genocide going on, and that's the human way of doing things. And so God says, fine, we can do genocide, but we're going to do it on my terms. And for this city, you get to keep the livestock. In that city, you don't. These are the rules, and if you don't follow the rules, you need to pay the ultimate price. And you go from that sort of schooling the toddlers all the way up to Jesus, who's telling us to forgive our enemies and give our enemies our coats and everything. And that's a lot of learning. right? But hopefully now we're ready for that lesson. Maybe God wanted that, they weren't ready to hear that when they were,
I think that's a very insightful and fair interpretation. Absolutely. And we're all doing our best. That reminds me, Rob Babcock, when we were doing our thing, not Rob Babcock, Rob Babcock. This is his interpretation of Old Testament God. It was really fun. Anyway, he's very creative.
Is that a sad face or an angry face?
I think he meant it for an angry face. Mine does look sad.
I think it's more appropriate to say it's a sad face.
I mean, and this is probably the reason that I am a Christian. I love the Old Testament. I love to read it. In the same way I love to read Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, right? Like I love it. There's so much truth there. So many good stories. But I would make the argument that only in Jesus do we really have the opportunity to touch and know God. And it is such a short period of time in our big long history. And that I feel like we spent a lot of time before and after, and even during Jesus, getting it wrong, doing our best, but getting it wrong. But they were promised the land. God promised that land. I don't plan to fight for my next birthday gift you all get me. Just show up with it and I'll say thank you. Other thoughts, questions, concerns?
I think we all have an Ebenezer that we touch the end to encourage people to think about their Ebenezer.
It's great.
Them to have more and more.
Yeah, absolutely. And if the church is doing well and right, the church is doing that. Church is celebrating the marriage, the funeral, the baptism, the confirmation, the birth of the child. You all do that pretty well here, right? I've seen some of
I
that.
think there's personal victories in Ebenezer's too.
Yeah.
And beyond the big things, right? I think that's what you're gonna,
Yeah.
it's sometimes it's a personal victory
Yeah.
on a daily basis to, get through the day without snapping at your 5-year-old, right? That's worthy of celebration as well, whatever that personal victory is.
All right, that's the end of my infomercial about Joshua.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thanks for sharing and asking questions. I don't know, how do we close?
Any way you want.
Prayer would be great. I'll pray. Holy God, be with us in our journeys, in what feels like our battles. Help us to see you, to hear what you have to say for us, and to accept your guidance, even if we feel unsteady or unsure. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Next week, a new series starts.